Hello, I'm J.R. Richardson. I am with the Bellevue University Military Veteran Services Center, and Bellevue University has partnered with the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation. And we are doing a project called Share Your Story. And we are today here with Ham, an Air Force veteran who has served during the Vietnam War. And Ham is here today. Today is the 24th of September. He is here with us here in Bellevue University to share his story. Ham, if you could introduce yourself, where you were born, and a little bit about when you were growing up.
My name is Hamilton Kennedy. My friends call me Ham or other things, but I was born in Rolla, Missouri in 1939. My dad worked for the small arms in St. Louis for a while, then we moved back to the family farm when my grandmother passed away to take care of Granddad. Lived on a farm for 8 years, attended grade school and a one-room school in Lake Springs and high school in Rolla, Missouri. Entered the School of Mines and Metallurgy at Rolla to college in 1957. Played football and drank beer, but didn't too good in the classroom, so they suggested that maybe I might have another track. So I joined the Air Force in the Aviation Cadet Program, which trains people to become navigators. And following initial navigator training in Harlingen, Texas, I went to California for bombardier training and then on the B-47 bomber aircraft. My first assignment was at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. You know, you join the Air Force to see the world and you get stationed 90 miles from home. Anyway, after 2 years at Whiteman, the B-47s were decommissioned and sent to the boneyard from that base. And I was moved to the 40th Bomb Wing at Forbes Air Force Base, Kansas, again in bombers. And after 1 year, those aircraft also went to the boneyard. And then I was transferred to the 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wings, also at Forbes. I also met my wife Patricia there, and we got married in 1965. We left Forbes in 1967, moved to Omaha for the 55th Wing up here. After 1 year, I was sent to Okinawa to fly a mission called Combat Apple. I was there for 3 years, flew a total of approximately 2,600 hours of combat time, 130 or so missions over the Vietnamese territory, most of it north of the DMZ. After that tour, we returned to Offutt, flying reconnaissance missions in the Peripheral Area Reconnaissance Program, which is designed to test the possible entry points for other aircraft against hostile nations. After 2 years here at Offutt, I was assigned to the headquarters SAC, Strategic Reconnaissance Center, where I ran the RC-135 program, and then I ran the Reconnaissance EWO program for SAC, and left there in 1982 to take an assignment as base commander in Sonderstrom, Greenland. I was in Greenland for 1 year as a remote, and then went to the 306 Bomb Wing in Upper State, New York, where I was also the base commander. 1 year after that, I was assigned to the Office of the Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon. I ran all the Air Force Tiara programs, that's tactical intelligence and related activities. And after a year of that, I decided it was time to move on to another post-Air Force life. My first combat mission in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam was in 1965. Then in 1966, we were TDY from Forbes to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, where we flew a number of missions trying to catch the Army signal of the SA-2 guideline missile, the SAMs. Uh, After that, we were stationed in 1968 on Okinawa, Flying Combat Apple. The long sortie was 22 hours, the short sortie was 18 hours. And about the most exciting event that happened there, that one evening we were flying over the Gulf of Tonkin when it became apparent that the North Vietnamese were trying to shoot down an Air America 130 over western Laos. We were able to notify the 130 crew that they were better get out of there or they were in trouble, and the aircraft was saved. For that, I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross.
So, in all the combat missions that you've flown, was there anything in particular in your training that prepared you, especially when you're dealing with SAMs, that basically came into fruition where you needed to rely on that training?
Actually, we were never in the SAM envelope. We were outside of the range of the SAMs all the time, but we were monitoring them. In fact, the electronic warfare officers on board the aircraft were specifically designed to give SAM warnings. So, all through the strike missions, which were held in daytime over North Vietnam, you would hear warnings, SAM, SAM, bullseye, blah, 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 wherever it was, and give the fighter aircraft that were attacking notification that SAMs were up and airborne. We also did the same thing for MiG flights. We would listen, we'd know when the MiG flights took off, we warned them that the MiGs were in the area, and that the attacking forces could take corrective actions to try to avoid being shot down.
And what aircraft were you in at that time?
RC-135.
That's what I was assuming. It's the
same
RC.
ones are here at Offutt today.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's got to be a surreal feeling knowing that probably some of those you actually flew on.
Yeah.
So, and they're still out there.
What people don't realize that it wasn't the SAMs or it wasn't the fighters that shot down most of the airplanes. It was ground fire. Just AK-47 shooting straight up in the air. Because you had to stay below 3,500 feet to get away from the SAMs, and bullets from a rifle will go up 3,500 feet. It's what happened.
Kind of a damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Damned if you do and damned if you don't.
We were interviewing some individuals, and one of them was involved with the 130 gunship.
Yes.
And he talked quite a bit about the SAMs and then how they had to deal with them. It was very scary because it was a timing. Everything was a timing issue.
Right.
And if you timed everything correctly, you were okay. But one mistake, and it got you.
Yeah.
So, but
let me just add something. The first mission I flew out of Dakota into the Gulf of Tonkin, we descended to low altitude, about 200 feet above the ocean, and teamed up with a 130 out of Da Nang and flew a mission up right off of the coast of North Vietnam near Haiphong and Hanoi. I don't know what the 130 was doing, but we were there to provide warning to them in case they were being tracked by SAMs or radar.
Yeah, it's quite a. I mean, when you think about what you guys do in the air, 25 years Air Force, aircraft mechanic for my first 7, working on 141s. It's absolutely amazing. Even the 141s, the pilots have trained to avoid, because everybody's vulnerable. But I imagine it's because of your altitude that you were not a threat from the SAMs.
No.
So that gives you some,
know. We were typically at 35,000 feet. Our separation from the SAMs was lateral, not vertical. But at 35,000, small arms fire is not going to bother us.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about your training when you decided to go Air Force. What do your folks think about that?
Well, I lost my father when I was a senior in high school, so he didn't get to vote.
Yeah, okay.
And mother was not happy about me going to the service, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
Any other siblings go into the service?
I have two sisters, had two sisters. I have one now. They were both, the oldest one was 13 years older. And my surviving sister is now 6 years older than I am. So, they were pretty much gone from the scene by the time I joined the service.
So you were the young one.
I was a baby.
You were the baby. How about, I imagine also coming back from Vietnam, it was different for you because you stayed in the service.
Yes.
How many total years did you do? How many total years did you do?
26 and a half.
26 and a half. And 2 base commander positions.
Right.
So you had a lot of moving around.
Quite a bit.
How about children?
My wife and I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Because of some chromosome defects between my wife and I, we lost both of the boys, one at age 8 and one at age 12. In fact, they're resting out here in Omaha National Cemetery right now. My daughter produced 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, and my 10th great-grandchild will be here in November.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
How neat, and I'm sorry for the loss. My wife and I also experienced that, and I have a daughter up at the Leavenworth National Cemetery.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's...
You know, you've been there then.
Yeah, it's not as difficult as where you were at. Ours was a miscarriage, but it's still very strong, and we had a full ceremony, you know. But traveling around, as a commander, what are some of the hardest things you had to do as a commander?
Well, at Sonderstrom in Greenland, the big problem was alcohol consumption. And I had 2 enlisted troops out of the 100 GIs that were there. I also had 650 Danes working for me. But of the GIs, I had 2 of them that managed to drink too much, so we banned them from drinking at the clubs. And then they discovered scope, which is a mouthwash, which is about 20% off. So they got hooked on scope, so I finally sent them back to the States to dry out, and one of them got sent to the Azores, which is great wine country.
So
at Griffiths, the years I was at Griffiths was 1983, 84. The Air Force, like all the services, had a great recruiting problem after the Vietnam War and the way people were treated and all that. So at Griffiths, the problem was that in order to get people to enlist, they almost gave everybody first choice of assignment when they came out of basic training. And since Griffiths was the biggest air base in the Northeast, the people out of Philly and Boston and New York and blah, 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 Pittsburgh would show up at Griffiths. And then they'd go home on weekends and smoke pot with their buddies. They'd come back to the base on Monday. We gave them a gold flow test, a urine test. If they came up positive and had less than 4 years service, they were out the next day and went back to mama. That was hard to do. But I think in the year I was up there, we lost almost an airman a day to pot. Can't have people on drugs when you've got nuclear weapons around. So.
Well, and ironically, and it may be something that you're familiar with, it may not be, but one of the people in my career field, she was a lady, so she was structural repair. She was a redhead, so I only mention that because it might bring back a memory. But she was at Griffiths, and she had an accident out on the flight line that almost ripped off her arm. And she had surgeries, because when I went to school with her, you could see the pieces missing from the skin grafts and that. And I only mention that because it gets dangerous if you don't know what you're doing or if you don't pay attention. But I won't ever forget it because A, she was a lady in our career field, and B, she was in a pretty severe accident up there. So.
Wonder what year that was. I don't remember.
I would have been in school with her. The reason I brought it up is because I would have been in school with her around 1985 or 6, around
That was
1985 or 6.
After I left.
So I'm thinking it was before though, because she would have been healed up in it. But her and I went to a 7-level specialized training together at Chanute. So Chanute was still open then.
Yeah.
It was interesting. But it's we had an interview with a Marine that lost I think about 12 individuals from a hot aircraft over in Vietnam, and they were told not to mess with it because they were trying to figure out how to disarm it, and they tried to disarm it and it went up.
Oh.
And you can tell it affected him tremendously, even though he wasn't associated with it, because of the loss of life, because of how horrible of an accident that was. So what was the? Let's go back to your combat missions. What was the very best day in all of your combat hours? When you think back on a day and you're reflecting, you watch a movie, you talk with one of your friends having coffee. What was the very best day on those combat missions?
I suppose, other than the Air America 130 incident, we were flying in the Gulf one night and getting ready for air refueling, which you had to do in order to stay on station 12 hours. And we noticed our tanker radar beacon was approaching Hainan Island. So we called the crew on guard and said, you better wake up and turn southwest. The whole crew had fallen asleep. We woke them up, they turned, and they didn't get shot down. So that was probably a good day.
Now that's crazy.
Oh,
Was it on autopilot, I guess?
it was on autopilot, yeah.
Yeah. And just like, because I know they have people that ride motorcycles that fall asleep on motorcycles because of the humming and the vibrations, and it can lull you to sleep.
The operations tempo for the tankers were unbelievable. Those boys were up and down, up and down, up and down. If they had a fighter, 105 or whatever, F4 come off of Nam, that had some battle damage and spraying fuel, we had tankers go in and get them right off the coast and take them all the way to their
Destination.
base they can land, and there's fuel going in and out just about as fast as they can pump it. So the tankers were real heroes over there.
And you know what? You don't think of it that way, but everything to keep it going, just like a racing crew, they're always fueling.
Yeah.
And one mistake in the pit stop and it cost you the race.
Well,
This will cost you a lot more.
the tanker crews couldn't buy a beer a day in the clubs. Could not, because the other people took care of them. They were that highly thought, and they earned it.
That is very interesting, very neat.
Of course, we couldn't tell them what we were doing, so it didn't matter.
Yeah. So the next question to that, the follow-up would be, what was the worst day?
Oh,
Worst day.
we had some maintenance difficulty and didn't get off on time. So the pilots pushed the throttles up right to the red line, and we're heading south at about 28,000, and the altitude hold on the autopilot came off, and the next minute we were about 19,000, like that. So that was, for a minute, rather interesting time.
What caused you to lose the altitude?
Oh, the altitude hold on the autopilot snapped off, and it just, that when you're on the red line, things happen fast. So
Yeah.
so anyway, but I didn't have a bad day in the air.
So no regrets.
No,
So
I love to fly.
let's without trying to get political, there's no question that just like the Vietnam era, we have very difficult recruiting times right now.
Right.
And I mentioned earlier, 136 years as a recruiter. It's just hard to explain what it goes through to create the all-volunteer force.
Yeah.
So what would you tell that young person today? Maybe it's one of those grandchildren that are thinking about following grandpa's steps. What would you tell a young person today about service in the military?
Well, you almost have to look at it backwards. When you retire, what do you get if you served 20 or more years?
A retirement.
You get free medical for the rest of your life, just about. Not totally, but just about, which is worth a fortune. You get a salary that's upgraded for inflation the rest of your life. If you get out young enough, you have time for a second career. So all those things add up. Plus, if you're really serious about it, you can get some of the most exquisite training that you can find no place else in the world if you're in the military. Some of it is transferable to the civilian community, and some of it is not, but it's unique. And I know that word gets used too much, but there are things that you'll learn about yourself, about your buddies, about your life that you'll not find in any other occupation. So go for it.
And without you don't have any regrets. How about your daughter growing up and all the things that she did, and your wife that she did to support your career?
Well, my wife loved it. Of course, losing the boys was not cute. That was awful. In fact, that affected her more than the military career did. As for my daughter, had we moved her with us, every time we moved, she would have been in 4 high schools in 4 years. So, in the middle of her junior year, we brought her back here. She stayed a year and a half with a friend and finished up high school at the same place she started. So, he did that for her.
Very neat.
So,
and it's unique that the military, you have so much trust in building relationships that that's very common.
yeah.
That we make those sacrifices, or there's a couple times where you'll leave and the family will stay there until a graduation is done, or to keep that stability. So there's a lot of sacrifices all the way around there. Let's go with, I'm trying to think, because we're looking for 30 minutes here. Have you ever thought about, did you go into any type of civilian aviation?
When I was in the service, I really had wanted to be a pilot, but they decided they needed navigators worse at the time.
Right.
Basically, I did very well on the AFOQT test, except for verbal. I don't know why I screwed that up, but anyway.
It's a Missouri thing. I always call it Iowegian. I speak Iowegian. So.
Yeah, right. So anyway, I think, well, just to prove it, I started taking private lessons in a small airplane. And I soloed. And navigation in a small airplane is not a lot different than the big airplane. You got more toys in the big airplane. You're moving at 7 miles a minute instead of half a mile a minute, but
right.
You can adjust that. And once I figured out, particularly when you're flying long missions like that, the pilots don't do takeoff and landing and refueling, and the rest of the time they're bored for 18 hours.
Yep.
The navigator's got to work, particularly when you're going up north, and I mean way north. So.
Yeah, there was one of the, and you might remember the name of it, but there was some of the civilian contracting airlines. One was called Seaboard or Shoreboard or something like that out of Seattle. I have an article in my office that one of our veterans gave us where you talk about the navigation. They made a little boo-boo over the Aleutian Islands. and ended up being forced down by 3 Russian MiGs
Wow.
and spending 3 days on the island, and it was 140 brand new soldiers on there. The contract crew, the brand new soldiers, and that was it, all headed to Vietnam.
Wow.
And nobody.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
World Airways.
Yeah, it wasn't World Airways, but it was Seaboard. It was one that I haven't heard of much, but it was called Seaboard Shore or something like that. It had Ocean
I
Shore,
remember that.
Ocean Shore maybe.
I remember that. Right.
Yeah, but they spent 3 days, and the gentleman said that I don't have anything to prove it other than I have one telegraph from Western Union from a major general straight to my mom and dad through our local police with instructions on how to deliver it. And the other one is 3 days later when they said they worked it out. So the first one says your son was downed and everything's okay. You'll hear from us, and 3 days later we got everything negotiated. He's on his way to Japan and then Vietnam.
Yeah.
So
I wonder how much we paid for that.
I'll bet you we paid a whole bunch because we were in their airspace.
Yeah.
And as you know firsthand, we were fighting Russians every day. So
Yeah.
they had a free shot at us. And the amazing thing is that they didn't acknowledge those soldiers, which I realize they didn't do nothing. But you know what? Think about how hard it would be to do nothing when you outnumber the enemy and you just came out of training and you're bigger than the world. Because they were going to bum rush them. They had AKs, but there was very few Russians on that little dinky island,
Yeah.
which is why it took so long, because
Yeah.
they had to fly people in to figure stuff out. But it was an incredible story, and it was in Life magazine,
Yeah.
and all 3 paragraphs together about that big
Yeah.
in Life magazine.
Yeah.
That's how much they explained of what happened. But anyway, so any quirky stories? We know about the greatest beer run ever.
No.
Did you have any of that going on? Or?
I'll give you just a couple of ideas. Speaking, you're talking about the Creole Island chain where that airplane landed. We flew a number of missions in the Sea of Ocots, doing our peripheral area reconnaissance. And the Russians were very, very sensitive about the northeast corner. So every time we went up in the northeast corner, they would strongly urge us to get the hell out of there by making radio calls that, although there were nobody near us, sounded like that they were going to run an intercept or something like that. So that was kind of interesting. The other most interesting mission that I had, you asked this question earlier, and I just thought of it. While we were flying out of Yokota, into the Sea of Ocots, into the Sea of Japan, and over into the East China Sea, I think the powers that be were looking for a particular evening when the weather was basically 0 to 30,000 feet. And so we flew a mission. They started out in the Sea of Japan. We crossed Korea south of the DMZ, went over into the, I guess it's the East China Sea, right into the mouth of Port Arthur, about 30 miles out. And what we proved was that the whole world drinks on Friday night and nobody's watching what's going on. They never saw us, they never tracked us. So
We just went across.
as far as they were concerned, we weren't there.
And
It
that's
was
something.
11 o'clock on Friday night. We were in weather. They couldn't have found us anyway. But radar could have tracked us. No radar and nothing.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I have another question from an anonymous person in the building.
Yes. A Marine anonymous person.
Yep. What was it like with the last name Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Since you're in uniform, you're out there, the Kennedy name is so very strong in the country and has been for years.
When the Cuban Missile Crisis began, I think it was the 13th of October. It was a Monday at noon. We knew there was a problem. And the press announced that Kennedy was going to make an announcement at 5 o'clock Eastern time that day. My crew, 3 of us, were designated as pre-flight crews, and we went out and pre-flighted airplanes for 4 days. As soon as maintenance would get the plane ready, we'd pre-flight it. The crew would come out, get on, and deploy to some location. Those locations included the US and Europe and other places. On Friday, the last airplane was done, and we caught the last airplane and flew to an East Coast Air Force base and spent a week on alert there. On alert. Then we came home on Friday, the next week, and the following Monday, had to go to the flight surgeon's office and get all the shots again. And the following Monday, we flew to Fairford in England and spent the next, until October the 13th, on alert at Fairford. When they finally decided the Russians really were not going to do anything about Cuba, then they brought us home. So having the name Kennedy didn't mean anything.
Didn't help you at all.
Because I was in the damned alert facility somewhere the whole time.
Yeah. Well, that's still just because you knew what was going on somewhat, because, the country was, everybody was panicking and waiting for the, watching the news, watching the television. Certainly that had to be, in the front of your mind that this could be it as far as our engagement directly with Russia.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't have been pretty natural. But we're there now again.
Yeah.
So, and if not so much Russia, China. And the language is still, the drawing swords is still there, so.
True.
Anything else you'd like to share to fellow veterans, to the community? This is your
not from my point of view, but I have some buddies that have more interesting stories than I have. They don't live here. But next time they're in town, I'll let you know, and I'll see if you can cajole them to come over here and sit in front of this camera and give you their stories. Some of them are very, very interesting.
I find yours very interesting, and I would absolutely enjoy that. And from the foundation's standpoint, if they're associated with Nebraska, as a lot of them that did that SAC mission are, we would love that. And if they come in a group, we would love that too.
Okay.
The Library of Congress has been very clear that anything that we can do creative like that helps the overall history of the project, because people interact with each other. So that would be fun. We would love to host something like that. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
One more point. You jogged me a while ago about my worst day flying. I never had a bad day flying, but in the spring, late 1961, early 1962, we were on alert at Zaragoza, Spain. There were 9 airplanes from Whiteman and 9 from Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire. We carried 1 weapon, and they carried the 4 smaller ones. And the communication link between Greenland and the States went down. So we were on alert at the end of the runway with engines running for about 45 minutes. And then they shut us down. And that was interesting. But we were basically one step away. We didn't know what the problem was at the time, but I found out later that it was a comm problem. They couldn't get the BMU's information back to Offutt or to DC, so we were there with engines running.
And just waiting.
Just waiting, yeah.
A lot of people don't understand what that means.
Yeah.
But that's for that moment in time, you're making your list in your mind of what isn't done, what has been done, what do I need to be doing. That's very incredible. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
We appreciate your time, and anytime you want to add something else, I do want you to know we can always do that. And I'm not doing that to make this longer.
Yes, you are.
Bye-bye.